Hello everyone, this is Caillou back with Dodger, and today we're going to be talking about the top 20 cards we're excited for from Viridian's last mission for the Revolution Custom Standard format. So this is obviously not an exhaustive list of all of the cards that are going to be playable or good or that are enticing in some way. This is just our short list of cards that we think are going to be both impactful and also fun to play with in some capacity. So
And it's in order, which means you can flame us if you think we did it wrong.
oh, for sure. Yes. Mhm. We didn't even bother with a tier list. We have exact numbers. This is
We
this is
have
our
numbers 20 to
science.
1. Yep.
Yeah.
We're going 20 to 1, right?
Oh yeah, we're going 20 to 1.
Okay, cool. Cool.
They save best for last and all that.
Of course, of course.
Okay, so you want to start us off?
Sure. So the first card is a bit innocuous. I put it on this list. It's Flamethrower Volley. It's 2 mana, does 3 damage, target creature, planeswalker, and at instant speed. So normally it's like, okay, sure, it's like lightning strike, right? But you can't go face. But the thing is, we actually don't have a lightning strike variant in the format. Before we got flamethrower volley, everything was either like a shock variant or like a 3 mana sorcery that does 4. Those are the main burn spells that are seeing play. I think that having a 2 mana way to deal 3 damage is really big. Plus, you get this upside of you can essentially kick it for 8 mana to deal 3 to something and 6 to the permanence controller, which is really huge just as an upside, because I think a lot of these Revolution decks sometimes these games go long. Maybe you're playing decks with like Gate of Realms or you're playing Mana Dorks, and like just having the opportunity to have your burn spell be a huge mana sink to go face and finish the game is really nice. I think this card will see a lot of play, especially because it's instant speed.
For sure. I think it's a little awkward that like they need to have something for you to be able to use the burn mode because
Mm,
um it can definitely be in situations where, especially versus like control decks or something, it doesn't have like that burning dawn flexibility where you're just like, yeah, I'll just start throwing my removal at their face. But
that's
it's
true.
still very powerful nonetheless. Instant speed is a good consideration, and
Hmm.
yeah, it just seems like a perfect niche fill for the
I
format's
agree. I think
needs.
it's because of like the lack of a better option. That's a lot that card really shines for me.
Yep, yep. Okay, and next up we have Perspicity. So technically the colorless member of the villainy mega cycle. Perspicacity has whenever you sacrifice an artifact or creature, draw a card. Whenever you cast a colorless spell, create a 1/1 colorless minion artifact creature token. So the second clause probably not going to be very relevant outside of like uh, the devoid and propagate cards from GQC. The first clause, however, we have a good aristocrats deck. We have lots of cheap artifact tokens and clues from SRC, and the glyphs from Svergard. So
Hmm.
I can definitely see like this being pretty flexible, and especially its colorless cost. I can see this being pretty flexible in like the types of things that people try to build with it, while also being just like straightforwardly powerful in like aristocrats and uh, propagate decks. So
I don't think this goes in Aristocrats, but I definitely think it goes in Propagate. I think this card is super gas in that deck for sure.
for sure, yeah, and just like yeah, it's just cool and flexible, and that's kind of like that's what we
Hmm.
like to see.
Yeah, it's a bit. I know some people have mentioned that they're a bit disappointed that the Doom is rotating when this card comes in, because this card does kind of sell the fantasy of playing like the shop style deck. I think Jeff even like ran that deck in League and got 4-1. So like, would have been cool to see it there. But nonetheless, I think this card is still pretty good.
For sure.
Okay, next up is a card that has been flying under the radar, I think, a little bit, but I think it's actually very strong. It's Rogue's Palace Card Shark. Um, so it's got a lot of text, but the gist is when you play it, it's a 4 mana 3/2. An opponent gets to look at the top 4 cards of your deck, and they factor fiction you. So they put them into 2 piles, but one of the piles is face down. Then you pick one of the piles, and you get to put all permanents with mana value 3 or less onto the battlefield, and you put the rest in your yard. Um, So like it's a little like it's a lot to parse, right? But the gist of it is, since you look at 4 cards, you're guaranteed to get to be able to pick a pile with 2 or more cards in it, right? And if you build your deck with where it's just like lands and permanents that cost 3 or less, this is almost always going to be a better better Bloodbraid Elf. And the face down face up aspect won't actually matter that much because you're probably going to get a pile that's good, and the face up at the very least you can always take. So I just think this card is like just a lot of value. I think that
The ability for
there's
it to hit lands is actually
yeah.
pretty huge. Just
Mhm.
like, cool, I'll just, like, worst case is like, cool, I'll double ramp myself. Like,
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah, so I think that there's like a fairly good chance that this is like the top end of like a Naya deck, or like some other deck that like wants a lot of like mid-range-ish creatures, and you can use this to kind of like get your card advantage going. You can play it on turn 3 off of a mana dork, also very good. Yeah,
And
so I don't
dorks
know.
work really well with it because, again, they're
Yeah,
permanents with mana value 3 or less. Let's go.
exactly.
Hmm.
And then as long as you run some cards that like let you mana sink, then you don't actually get punished for running a deck full of cheap cards, basically.
For
And you
sure.
have ways to use all this extra lands you're putting into play.
Hmm. Next up,
All right,
we have
sweet.
Smirk, Dark Hands Familiar. So,
Yeah.
2 3 for 2, pretty reasonable stat line. It also draws you 2 cards, quote unquote, by putting the top 2 cards of your library into your plot. So, if you have good ramp or if you have Therese Grimm's Blood, you can quickly turn those into card advantage. And
Mm-hmm.
whenever you cast your second spell each turn, you draw a card and lose 2 life, which you can like pair that with Dark Bargain or cheap 1-drop aggressive creatures and turn that into a whole card advantage engine right there. I think.
Yeah, so if you play this like on turn 3,
Mm-hmm,
you basically played a 2 mana Phyrexian Rager with better stats,
mm-hmm.
as
And
long
I'll
as you pair it with a 1-drop.
Yeah, and also Smirk, that 2/3 stat line pretty relevant because it eats Stoic Sentinel, it eats Arbiter more relevantly. Like 2/3 is just kind of a good stat line to be at in this format, and Smirk
Yeah,
delivers.
that's partially been the case because we didn't have a lightning strike, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that's another reason why I think the Flamethrower Volley is such a big deal. But yeah, Smirk is just a really solid engine creature with a very high floor, which is why I like the card a lot.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next up is one of my favorite cards in the set, Hiroshi of the Old Ways. Hiroshi is a Planeswalker with Flash, which is already pretty spicy. And the way it rationalizes the Flash is you get a free activation of one of its abilities when they enter the battlefield. So it comes down, you can either bounce one of your creatures in response to a removal spell, you can use one of your creatures to kill off another creature at instant speed, or you can just make a 2/2 at instant speed. Um, and being able to flash in your Planeswalker on your opponent's end step is really huge because it essentially fogs an entire turn of your opponent attacking it, and ensuring you get at least 2 activations of its abilities. In addition, I think the fact that this card offers a way to bounce your creatures for value means that I think there's a good like flash tempo deck out there that has ways to like self bounce its own creatures and get recurring value that way, which is a very exciting archetype for me. So I think it's like a cool take on green.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just it's so flexible. I think it's kind of astonishing. You do need like good creatures, like you need to curve into this for it to
Mm-hmm.
really slap. But like, yeah, I think we were mentioning. Actually, we'll leave that for a later time. But I think you know which card I was about to mention. But yeah.
Sure.
Um, Next up, we're now a quarter through the list. Number 15, Evelyn Snakewood, Dark Druid. So there's a lots of hullabaloo about this being good in Reanimator. Um, but we already have Elvish Witness and Stoic Sentinel for dorks that can also incidentally mill you in that deck. Where this kind of shines is um, in more mid-rangey decks, where you can use it as a dork early, and then cash her in for value to just go over the top later. When like, because later
Yeah.
in the
For
game, like,
instance,
yeah, yes, sir, go ahead.
for instance, in Jund, I think this card is just better than Stoic Sentinel because the thing about Stoic Sentinel now that it doesn't surveil 3, is like you usually have to bin the cards or at least one of the cards, and you're usually going to have to exile those to actually get the value out of being mana ward, right? So the early game value of potentially binning your Burning Dawn or whatever isn't as likely to get, like, for you to get that. And the late game value is like, okay, cool, I got a Surveil too. Like, that's a lot to get off of a mana dork, right? But here it's like, now you have the potential to get the best creature in your graveyard, which is like far, far better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and can just like completely turn around lots of mid-range matchups. Because if you just have your dork as a 2/2, it's like, well, okay, I'm staring down their Mercalt. But if all of a sudden you can get back like Trezok or something, yeah,
Yeah,
that changes real quick.
exactly.
Okay, you want to hit us up with the next one?
Sure. So the next card is Eavesdrop. Um, it is 1 mana, instant, Surveil 1, draw a card. So it's opt, but better. And this card was spoiled for Innistrad Midnight Hunt and came with a lot of hype, especially for Eternal format players. So, like, I think everyone generally has a pretty high opinion on this combination of effects. Having the ability to have an instant speed cantrip that also enables your graveyard synergies is just really good. I think just having opt but better will be very good for blue.
Yeah, there's not much to say about it. It's just very solidly flexible, and there are lots of cards which you want to bin in this format. Um, and the ability to do so on your cheap 1 mana cantrip is just gravy.
Yeah.
Next up
Sweet.
is Fireslinger. This little gal, 1 in a red for a 1/1, but it can tap to deal 1 damage to any target and then deal 1 damage to you. So
this is a pretty deep cut reprint, honestly. This card was a massive house back in the day.
yeah, I mean, Chillbrain is noted fan of old Magic. Runs the what is it, Otaria posting Twitter account for old Magic shit posting. But yeah, Fireslinger, like it, it can like you have to be very careful about playing 1 toughness creatures because you can just get doinked or just get them mowed down by Fireslinger. It also makes like combat math a little bit more annoying.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and also
Yeah,
the
just
ability to just like if you're an
I
aggressive
don't like
deck and
cost
they
two.
like drop a blocker, you're like, cool, I'm just gonna start burning you out, and if you have no way to start putting pressure on me, you'll die first.
Yeah,
So
it's. I'm honestly not sure how much play this is going to see, and I would be very sad if that was 0 because I don't think it should be seeing 0 play. Like, I think this card is very, very good at the very least in sideboards, because you bring this in against like basically any aggro deck, and if you play this on the play, you usually win the game unless they have a removal spell. So yeah, I don't know. I think this card's just good. Like, just just play it, especially if you pair it with other burn-based removal. It allows those burn spells to kind of like trade further up. Like your shock can now kill 3 toughness creatures, etc.
yep. Okay, next up is Elder Matthias Joden. So this guy is just a house.
Yeah.
So at the beginning of each end step, you make a 1/1 white colored creature token. So even before they get to untap, as if they don't kill this guy at instant speed, you're already generating at least a little bit of value. And then you can sacrifice a non-nightmare creature, make a nightmare, and draw a card. So board advantage, card advantage, everything you can want. This guy is just kind of good in general, but is absolutely the nuts in aristocrats, which again, as I mentioned earlier, has definitely been looking for some sort of good cheap card advantage engine because that deck is really good, but both a little bit underplayed and also can sometimes have awkward hands. And I think Elder Matthias Joden can definitely fix the latter of those. So
And I think what makes this guy particularly good is the biggest weakness for aristocrats is that you kind of are often forced to overextend into wraths. What this card does great is like you can play it and it'll usually represent like you can just let him sit there and it'll represent like 3-4 creatures without you spending any additional mana. And if you just sit there and hold up your mana while you're attacking your opponent, if they try to sweep, you can just like attack a couple creatures, get some cards. Or if they do sweep, it's like okay, they actually only went like 2 for 1, and that you can come back from that like much more easily than if you got like 5 for 1.
Yeah, and like
So I just think the flexibility and power is all here, and it's just like an efficient card.
yeah, and
Um,
one thing that you mentioned earlier is
like
that like if they just try to point removal at him in response, you say you sack him because he's not a nightmare, so you just sack himself
yeah,
to his own ability, and then draw a card.
so
That's
he
like cool.
so he's also like a very good quote unquote 5 drop. Like if you play him on turn 5 and hold up
Hmm.
2, also very good.
For sure, for sure.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. Next
Um,
up is the Sunfire. It is a 2 mana equipment. It is +2/+2. Equip 2. We talked about this in the other video a little bit, but Volshock Morningstar is actually an equipment that dominates limited. So when you give it these extra abilities, which are you can basically cast a shock for red whenever your equipped creature attacks, and you can also cast a white mana tap target creature you don't control, you gain life equal to its power. It means that the creature that you've equipped is actually pretty darn hard to block because you can shoot a small blocker and tap a big blocker at the same time. So your opponent will need to have 2 big blockers to actually stop whatever you're attacking with. And the creature gets +2/+2. So like, I don't know. I just think this is like a lot of nice utility and like solid stats for not that much mana.
for sure. Yeah, and like it's another card where like fireslinger, you can just lock out boards with this. The difference is that like you can do that in like an aggressive matchup, like and
Yeah,
and we
you
already
do need to continually spend mana on it, but like hitting for 2 is a lot bigger than hitting for 1.
yeah, and you hit for two, and you can also just like fog blockers. Just like you tap them down, and if they try to attack with it next turn, like okay, whatever, I've already gained life. So
Yeah, so if you attack with this can potentially represent up to like I don't know 7 damage if you deal 2 to their face,
mm,
give your creature +2/+2, and tap the creature that would have blocked it.
yeah,
You know?
and or like just like on its own, it's like a 4+X life swing where X is the power of their strongest creature, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty filthy. And also we have experienced armor smiths to be able to tutor it up. So,
Hmm. Sweet.
um, yeah. Next up, number 10 on the list, we have Whirlwind Romantic. So 3/1 with haste for 3. Um, and whenever it attacks, you can gain control of target creature defending player controls with mana value 2 or less, and then it's forced to be attacking its owner. So obviously there's like a quote unquote narrow niche where you want to play this, but that niche is insane and amazing, especially when we have we have coalesce creatures, which are the which are the same mana value as their front face. You have experience creatures,
Pretty
which are the
hilarious.
same mana value as their front face, and
Yeah.
even in like neither of those matchups, you can still grab dorks and force them to like poke your opponent, like stuff that would have otherwise been good as cheap early blockers to stop the hasty 3/1. So
Yeah, I think like the floor here is like a 3/1 haste, and the floor is basically if your opponent doesn't have a creature that you can steal with it. Um, and that's not like the worst thing ever, so it should be main deckable, but it also just straight up dominates aggro mirrors because it adds like it's hard to anticipate coming out of the hand because if your opponent wants to play around this, they have to leave out 2 blockers, which is not often something they don't want to do if they're an aggro deck. So in general, I just think this card should be a very potent sideboard card and should potentially be played main in some metas.
yeah, I don't know that we have a great black red deck that would want to run this. Maybe you're on Earth Shell, but I don't know.
No,
Um,
definitely not that deck.
yeah, so
I think actually aristocrats could probably splash red and try to sack off the creature you steal.
that would
That'd be
actually be
interesting.
that would be exciting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, okay. Uh, but yeah, speaking of aggressive red cards, next up we have Blunt Instrument. Um,
Okay.
so yeah,
I
this
just
is
love this name.
oh yeah,
The set's naming is so good.
this set's flavoring in general is just kind of top notch, and I think that like,
Yeah.
especially coming into a space where like, I think that like Secrets of the River Cities was definitely like heavy on people's minds as like it's not the same genre, but it definitely has like overlapping tropes and like aesthetics. But but like Viridian's Last Mission definitely distinguishes itself like really
It
well.
feels very much like its own thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which I love. So
Mm-hmm.
The card Blood Instrument, it's a Jackal Pup, but it has +1 toughness and trample, and it has the added upside of you can turn off the self damage if you itch it or equip it, which is nice and can definitely be relevant if you have like incidental gadget cards or maybe an aura. Um, although, as you said earlier, that's kind of like it's almost flavor text. Like you don't actually care about the Jackal Pup part that much because at the end of the day, it's Jackal Pup with trample and +1 toughness, and like that's just good enough, especially in like there's not a ton of competition for like red 1-drops right now because people are even playing stuff like Zipping Zapper, which like no offense is like not that good, so I think just getting a 2-power red 1-drop is really huge for just straight up mono red aggro.
Yeah, like this and like a few other cards from the set definitely like push mono red aggro back into the forefront, and I think that's really
Mm-hmm.
cool. Um,
Yeah.
Especially against like because we were talking about like some of the more mid-rangey offerings the set has.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be fooled; it still very much supports quick, aggressive decks in the mix.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
All
so
right.
for
So next up we have the rare land cycle, and these are monocolored lands. So this set doesn't offer dual lands, but monocolored lands, as we've seen in Throne of Eldraine, can be very, very relevant for constructed. Um, and basically, how these work is they enter the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands of their type. Do you want to talk in color order, maybe?
sure, yeah. So
Okay.
there's Justicehar Headquarters, which is the white one, which allows
Hmm.
you to pump out 1/1 white creature tokens, but only if you've attacked this turn. I think that one is
It's
good,
fine.
but it's fine. But then like lots of times where you're gonna want the token generation is like after you're wiped, so it's a little bit awkward in that respect. And like I think if you're not get like if you're an aggro deck and you have like emptied your hand, by that point you probably should have already won. Or extra 1/1s will usually not make the difference, but it's still fine. It's still like card never gonna like turn down like board advantage on a land. But I think that there are other members of the cycle which are much better. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I would say like uh, Castle Ardenvale is a card that I actually really enjoyed playing with, and this card costs half as much to activate, so um, it's like a Castle Ardenvale that you are much more like willing to play in an aggro deck, which fortunately is exactly what it's telling you to do. So I think that's neat. Um,
for sure.
Next up, we have Thunderbrain Labs, and I gotta admit, I think this is the worst one right now. I don't think there's enough treasure making cards to make the treasure part of this
Mm.
exciting, especially since you can only activate at sorcery speed.
Mm. And like
Um,
copying clues is fine, but then it's like it's not amazing.
Copying clues is fine. It's pretty expensive to do so. I guess you can like there's the 1-drop that investigates. That card's pretty good. There's endless paper trail, and like ultimately, if you're playing mono blue, the opportunity cost of running a couple of these isn't that high. So like maybe you just do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so like maybe I could also see like if we get a card that makes like a really good artifact token, like I could see this card popping off then. You never
For
know.
sure.
It also copies gadgets in this set, but I don't think blue is really a big gadget color, at least
Yeah,
in
we
constructed.
did you have codename Wise Guy, but I think that's the main one.
Yeah, that
Um,
card is kind of bad. I don't know. Sorry.
it's an honor. How dare you?
Sorry,
Um,
chill.
Next up, we have Darkhand Enterprises, which I think I would clock as the best of the cycle. I know that you're going to disagree with me with the next one, but
I
um,
think it's either the second or third best.
mhm.
But like Volrath Stronghold is inherently very good.
Yeah,
Um,
just
it
you
is
can
sorcery
grind
speed.
out mid range
It does matter, but
matchups like crazy.
yeah,
So
like it's Volrath Stronghold that you generally only want to play for mono black, but it has black mana. So um, the opportunity cost of running this in your mono black deck is actually very low, and you can super grind people out if you have at least some very high impact cards that you can play repeatedly.
for sure.
Um, So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think like this is definitely pretty scary, honestly, because Laura Stronghold is a very scary land.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also exciting. At least
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't go in villainy.
Yeah. But yeah, the next one I think is the one that I think we have the most contention on because
Right.
I definitely I my opinion is the worst of the cycle, but I know that Dodger, Pip, and a few others think it might be the best. So
So here's why. The Rogue's Palace, paying 2 mana and discarding your whole hand to draw a card doesn't sound great, right? But the thing is, you're generally going to be doing this when you don't have any cards in your hand anyway. Um, and I think just giving mono red a potentially untapped land that also gives you extra card draw in late game if you flood out um, is really valuable. So you're getting a potentially a lot of you're potentially getting like something that makes or breaks the difference in between you winning and losing the game, especially in like a burn style deck, right? Because every card you draw is really important um, in games where you flood out, and what you're losing is like okay, maybe you have a land that enters tapped if you have only 2 lands in your hand or something, but you can always rectify that by playing more lands in your deck, and this card also helps you in situations of mana flood, so it kind of works out, right?
for sure.
So it works in one style of deck, which is a low curve red mono red aggro deck. That's fine. It's very good in that deck, and those kinds of decks tend to be good in standard. So I don't know. I just think this card it will very likely have a home at some point.
For sure. Yeah. That much I can definitely
Yeah.
agree on. And then Snakewood's Hideout, the last of the cycle, pretty straightforward. Just puts a +1/+1 counter on target creature. I
This
mean,
is also quite good, honestly.
yeah, just breaking board stalls. Like I think like it's a little bit like less maybe fancy than some of the others, but it's just really straightforwardly like yeah, I would like to be able to buff up my board on a land.
This is like not a bad combo if like you're playing Budding Companion Stompy. Like having
Oh
your like kind of does the Seed Shrine thing, kind of.
yeah, like you play Budding Companion on 2, you play Snake. Well, yeah, you play Snakewood's Hideout on like turn 3 or 4 and get that extra counter to speed it up. Yeah, you can definitely do that.
Yeah. All right.
Mhm. And
Anyway, those
then
are all the monocolored lands. I
yep,
think they should see play. I like that there's incentives to play monocolor because oftentimes, if mana is good enough, people can reliably play 2+ colors, then people like don't often actually play monocolor. So it's nice to have some cards that are like, hey, no, try this.
for sure, for sure.
Hmm.
Um, for our next item on the list, we're going to continue cheating. It's going to be another set of cards, and these are the Plot Storms kind of package. The main one of these is Doomsday Device. So,
Yeah. So we've kind of listed 3 cards that I think will make or break the archetype. Um, and we can start with Doomsday Device because I think this is the best card for the archetype because it fundamentally allows you to cheat on the main restrictor, which is you have to hit 7 mana.
yeah, it's and it's so cheap. Like it
Yeah.
adds stuff to your plot, um, and then it automatically ramps you. And like usually the best way to turbo it is stuff like Evil Scheme and Ancestral Scheme, which we see here, which add 2 and 3 cards to your plot for 1 mana respectively. Where it's like if you have like the actual God curve, you can definitely go like turn 3, crack a Doomsday Device, and just storm off and win.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that is like the Metro for Christmas line hand. I think just like the hands where you draw Doomsday Device and the ones where you don't are so like crazy different that I actually think like it's worth running. If you can find a good card that will tutor your Doomsday Device, I actually think it's worth doing that because the card kind of makes or breaks the deck.
yeah, for sure.
Um,
Or just
I
like
think there's
if you can
a
have
there's
a
a
good
rare in this
cantrip
set.
density to
There's a
actually
rare in this deck called Heist of the Century, which can tutor for an artifact card, and it can also tutor for a Calamity Planeswalker. So maybe you run a couple Calamities, and you just like Calamity can also help you ramp up, right?
mm. and it also grabs a rogue, right?
Yeah. So
I don't know
maybe
if
there's
there's
some like random rogue you can get.
yeah, or like
I don't know.
I don't know if
It's
there's
an
like
interesting
there might be
card.
an expensive enough rogue where it's like a good to hit off your plot as like a win con, just as like a
Yeah,
random
maybe.
thing. But yeah, and then
Anyway,
like
we're
speaking
brewing
of
on
yeah
we're brewing on live.
speaking of win cons, the world aligns to my
Yeah.
whims. It's essentially oh god, I'm blanking on the name. What's the canon equivalent?
Mine's Desire.
Mind's Desire. Um,
Yeah.
that also you can just like if you if you naturally draw it, you can just discard it to add a card to your plot. We also
Yeah.
have Ace in the Hole, which is like if you cast I think 5 or more spells this turn, it deals 11 damage distributed among
Yeah. Yeah.
any number of targets. And then there's also Inexorable Onslaught, which is can't be countered and makes 2/1/1s for each spell cast this turn.
Hmm.
So lots of
I
different
do want to
directions
talk
the deck
about
can go. Oh,
I do
go
want
ahead.
to talk about the word lines to my whims a little bit because I think that that card is um insanely good for the plot deck as well. Like I guess I don't know if we've talked about how much I love Magma Opus before, but I fucking love Magma Opus. And part of the reason for that is because in its archetype, it's both enabler and enabled card. You know what I mean? Um, if
Yeah,
you need to get more mana to cast your big spell, it's like, hey, you can pay 2 and discard it, and you got a treasure. Plus, you can do tricks where like you discard it and then you, I don't know, torrential gear hulk it or whatever, right?
for sure. And
Um,
like, and,
so I
and,
just
and
think
the,
like,
I was just gonna say like I
well, I
think
just
the
think,
good part about it is that like it's not like and it's not like bad design where it's like you never it's like oh you're never punished. It's just like yeah you want to you don't you want to incentivize people to be able to have flexibility and not be punished
exactly.
for running some of these like large because it's yeah because the mana cost is something that you want people to be able to ramp into at the late game, but you don't want to be useless early. So yeah, it's just
So
it's good
you don't
design
feel bad.
team
You don't feel bad at all about running 4 copies of the World Alliance My Whims in your deck, even though it's an 8 mana spell, which I think is really cool.
for sure.
All right, moving on to number 6, we
Mm-hmm.
have Sir Hogginsworth Quartermaster. So this card is a Stoneforge Mystic in stats and ETB, but instead of putting your equipment into play for free, um, when you free cast an equipment spell, you get to get a gadget that's either First Strike, Flying, or Lifelink. So there's some flexibility there. I'd say usually you want Flying or Lifelink, but First Strike can be neat too if your opponent like already has Flyers, or if you need to block without have your creature dying.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in general, I just think like having Stoneforge Mystic, like with the body plus ETB, is like good enough that you'll probably see some like equipment toolbox white decks being played,
Yeah, and we already
which
talked
is great.
about Sunfire earlier, which works quite well with this.
Sunfire is one of the best targets to get with this for
Yeah,
sure.
Losei's Dawn Chime if you aren't in red white is also quite good.
Mm-hmm.
And we have redundancy in experienced armor smith. So yeah, there's definitely a shell there asking like begging to be built.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
okay, and I think the next one is also another card that you're invested in. So you want to hit that?
Yeah, so this is Tobias Maxwell, Justiciar Boss. Um, this card is a 3 mana 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, you get to get a creature from the top 3, and you put the rest in your graveyard. So relevant for whatever graveyard's energies you're running. And at the beginning of combat in your turn, it can temporarily turn one of your creatures into a saboteur. So whenever that creature hits a player, you draw a card. And I just think like this is just such an efficient bundle of stats plus a solid ETB plus continued value while it's on the board that I think this card is not only good in like tempo decks, but it's just a very great mid-range creature. Like if you're playing like a Sultai Pod style deck or like Bant mid-range, or as long as you're playing like 20 plus creatures, and you care about your graveyard, even tangentially, like this card is insane. Um, I think it should be. It's just good to play, even if you might maybe only care about one of the abilities.
Oh yeah, for
um,
sure. I think the main thing is gonna it's a little weird to like find a blue deck with the density of creatures, but I think that just means that it's gonna be like not a deck building challenge per se, but it's gonna require uh, specific types of decks to
I
go.
wouldn't say it's that hard. I'd say just play green.
Yeah,
You'll be
okay,
fine.
fair. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just value, value, value all the way down.
Exactly. Yeah. All
Okay.
right. Number 4. We're in the top 5, by the way, so we're getting
Yep.
close to the end of the list.
Yeah. Place your
Number
bets
4
now.
is Luxurious Estate.
Yeah. So
So
you might be wondering why are we putting a strictly worse mana confluence on the list? Oh, I guess not strictly worse since it has the
probably
tap
not
for
strictly
color,
worse.
since it adds for colorless. But the I mean, it's just like it's just a really good fixing land, and obviously it still has a downside of like if you're gonna bolt yourself to play this turn one versus aggro, you're gonna feel real sad. But like I think with the Vostum Remnants rotating out, the density of ETB untapped lands that we have goes down, and
Also,
Windsur's Estate comes in to. Oh yeah, and Abandoned Remnant for sure. And
yeah.
this kind of swoops in as like, hey, you wanted. I heard you wanted untapped fixing for your 3 or 4 color greed pile decks.
And then the nice thing I like about this a lot is like mana confluence. Sometimes it's like, okay, well, you just like you're playing Magic against your mid range or control opponent,
And
and
you
you
just
just
can't cast a
have to
spell
keep
because you
using this,
die.
or like yeah, you just have to cost yourself like 4 or 5 life over the course of the game, right? With this card, like you have the choice. You know, like you can always just not lose life to this land if you want, if you can afford to, you know.
For
And I
sure.
just think having that flexibility is really, really important. Um, and as long as your mana base can, like, as long as your mana base can handle either the life loss or the being slower slash sometimes tapping for colorless, I think that this card is really, really important. Or
Mm,
like will be really impactful to help a lot of mana bases work.
for sure.
All right, we are in the top three now. It's getting down to the
Yeah.
wire.
And number 3 is definitely a favorite of yours. So.
I freaking love this card. It's my favorite card in the set.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you have Justiciar, Overseer. Um, so it is Harm's Way on the stick. Harm's Way is notably one of my favorite combat tricks because it does something that's like very uniquely white in a very efficient way. But unfortunately, it hasn't showed up in canon for a while because it's kind of confusing, uh, honestly. But now we have Justiciar Overseer, which casts Harm's Way on ETB, and it also comes with a 3/1 Flash Flying Body. So it's pretty much always going to be relevant, even if your opponent's playing like Control or something. It can also come in and like redirect, like if your opponent attacks with a 2-drop or the 2-power creature, you can play this, block it, Justiciar will survive, and then you can send the 2 damage somewhere else, either your opponent's face or one of the other creatures. So like, just very flexible card, lets you do a lot of neat tricks. Almost always going to be good.
Yeah, this one is the card I was referencing earlier with Orochi, where it's pretty filthy to either bounce it to your hand so you can reuse it. Also, since it has 3 power and curves perfectly into Orochi, you can also just boink. You can also use the -2 bite mode, like very effectively with this. And of course, they have flash, so they both are partners in crime in that respect. So
Excellent. Yeah. Very good. Very good. Love this card.
yeah,
All
number
right.
2 is a card which you don't love so much, and but come on,
Ah,
guys, were you were you really expecting this one not to be on the list? It's villainy. Um, Arguably one of the most iconic custom cards of all time. Finally making its way to, or I guess not finally, but very early on in Revolution's lifespan, making its way to the format. It's going to be interesting to see what impact this has, but obviously, Strong House um, builds an entire mono black control deck or black X control deck on just on its merits alone. We definitely have.
it's your engine, it's your win con, it's your
Mhm.
stabilization method, it's everything,
It gives you
right?
a back rub, like
Yeah. Does
just
your taxes,
yeah.
fixes your car.
It takes your dog on a walk. But yeah, the it's just the complete package.
Yeah.
And I think this has been the card that in even in like the small pre-format spoilers that we've had so far, it's been the most a card with the most buzz around it in it and in
Yeah.
most anticipation. So
So
the
so okay.
mhm.
I will say I personally don't like this card. I don't find it. I find that it leads to games sometimes, not all the time. Sometimes where the game is basically over and you're kind of playing it out as a formality, right? I think there are many people who agree with me about this. However, I think we should see what it does. I think if you want to beat this card, you can. There are many different ways you can set up your deck so that you can beat this card. You can play hand attack. You can play counter magic. You can play bigger creatures. You can play haste creatures. You can play hate bears.
Flexible
Um,
removal, cough cough event horizon.
you can play flexible removal. There's just you can play burn. You can play control. You don't have to play creatures. Like I think that
you can
if
ramp and
they're
just go over the top of this before they can burn you out. So
I think regardless of whether or not villainy is like good TM, quote unquote, people will be playing it. So you do need to make sure you have a way to deal with this, at least in your sideboard, I think. Um, which, it is what it is. The deck has very pronounced strengths and a fair number of weaknesses. So yeah, I mean, you're allowed to not like a card and also be like, okay, this card has counterplay. Here's what I'm going to do to beat it.
for
That
sure,
sort of
for
thing.
sure. Um,
But we'll see how it does.
yeah.
It's the jury's still kind of out on exactly how good it's going to be,
Hmm.
but clearly we think it'll be fairly strong because it's
Yeah.
number 2 on this list.
Yeah. And we have the epitome of evil at number two, but you know what our number one is? It's the hero of the set, the namesake,
Let's
codename
go.
Viridian, because you know what? Evil always loses to good. That's the moral of this story. And also, this
Uh,
is a flavor win because codename Viridian is a hate bear that can come down and tax them from casting villainy. But yeah.
Also, just batshit insane.
Oh yeah. I mean, the like God, so so flexible as just like, oh cool, I'm just gonna first strike and nothing can hit me. I'm gonna haste and like kill you out of nowhere. I'm gonna lifelink and then suddenly the race is like out of the way.
Burn absolutely cries because they're being taxed, and if they can't kill it, it's a 3/3 lifelink.
Yeah. Oh, and I think that
They
like
have a flyer
the
and
sec.
can't freaking reach.
I think the second clause of this is like you can make if you're playing this with Hogginsworth, you can make it surprisingly relevant where you can just tax control decks out of the game and just make them really suffer.
That's true. People I kind of forget that you can also just stack it. Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you
also
like
the
you.
gadget ability sticks around. So if she dies, then like you still have the gadget.
Mm-hmm.
So like, there's just so many layers of like goodness on this card. It's the kind of card that like I actually remember this card was in Chilbrain's original pitch for the set in um, the MSC Survivor Finals,
Mm-hmm.
and the prompt for designing this card was literally make a card with the set's premier mechanic that will sell boxes. Think Oko.
Oh yeah, this definitely
Now, I'm not saying this card is as good as Oko,
yeah, but I mean,
but
I am saying that it justifies that mythic rarity. We print in some builds tonight.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
this is the kind of card that will sell booster boxes of your set. It's very good. You should play with it. It'll win you games. Um,
And yeah,
I don't know. That's pretty much all I got to say.
and yeah, those are
Anything you
our
want to say?
top 20 cards for Verdian's last mission for Revolution. And obviously, the set is like fucking 200 and something cards big. 20 cards is not going to encapsulate all of the impactful cards for constructed. Definitely check out the set file and make your own conclusions and brewer. And if you think a card looks cool and you're like, why didn't they didn't put it on the list? Maybe it's not good. No,
Yes.
chances are it was like just off the bottom.
If your favorite card is not on this list, make sure you flame us in the comments.
Oh yeah, make sure to tell us how we got it wrong and how many cards on this list are complete dog shit. Make sure to tell us in
Exactly.
detail. Yeah.
Make sure you do it. Make sure you do it as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I am nourished by your hatred.
But yeah, and after that, make sure to on I think it's what is it September whatchamacallit? September 8th?
September 8th is probably when the first
Yeah, and September 8th
GP with
is
the set is going live. Yeah.
oh okay. Oh yeah, it
Or
start of
wait,
September is when the set
I
releases.
think we released the set start of September. Yeah.
So September 1st, come through, play with Viridian's last mission. It's gonna be dope. Um, and I hope that like something on this list has caught your fancy and made you excited in pre-format brewing, so you guys can hit the ground playing. But yeah,
Oh yeah.
other than that, this is gonna be Caillou and Dodger signing off.